Because Judaism and Christianity preaches a great deal about sin and evil, the accusation against Judaism and Christianity is that it is a guilt-ridden religious movement designed to control and manipulate people through this manipulation of feelings of inadequacies on the individual's part. Nothing could be further from the truth. Yes, Judaism and Christianity have a sense of the sinfulness of humanity and what it's about. Springing from the depths of our being, from the Yetzer Hara, our own evil imaginations. We imagine that sins are sort of arbitrary, just there to take all the fun out of life, when nothing could be further from the truth. We imagine that something might be wrong in general, but not wrong for us in this particular circumstance or situation. And that this sin or that will fulfill us, will make us happy, will give us pleasure, and no one will get hurt by it. That's always the basic tendency of sin. We know basically what's right and wrong. But why do we so often do what's wrong? And does it bring us fulfillment in any way? Or does it sap us of joy because of the very nature of the act, not because of rabbis, ministers, and priests manipulating us with guilt feelings? And we can see right throughout the scriptures how the story of sin and salvation back and forth is in a tug of war. And that's why the scriptures are so interesting. They're not sanitized. In there, there's adultery, murder, rape. There is greed and selfishness. There's ambition and vanity. The whole panorama of human weakness. But there's also in the midst of that God's mercy, God's mercy, God's mercy. Some time ago, a fellow in a very strict religious order, he was sort of isolated and contemplative, a Carthusian, had to leave his hermitage and go on a journey from one city to the next. So he took the bus. And he had been in his hermitage for quite a while. And the first thing he noticed when he got on the bus was how sad everybody looked. And he thought, wow, there must have been some national tragedy. Everybody's so depressed. Everybody's so closed in on themselves. Not a smile on the face of anyone on this bus. That's because he'd been living so long near God and with God that in his fellow hermits he would see a joy, peace, and happiness that the world couldn't know. It was just an ordinary day in the ordinary world. And our culture suffers from low-grade depression. Healers like psychologists and psychiatrists who play an important role in civilization, dealing sometimes with very serious physical and emotional illnesses, they can bring a person up from total despair to normal unhappiness. But not so much beyond that. It's only the Spirit of God that could lift the human soul and give it peace, happiness, and joy in the midst of an otherwise joyless world. Now, the first reading tells the story of adultery, murder, hypocrisy, deception. David had plenty of wives, plenty of wealth, plenty of power, but he wanted another man's wife. And he took her and killed her husband. Murder and adultery. When his sin was exposed with shame and guilt, he repented. That was fine, and God forgave him. God is always willing to forgive the truly repentant sinner, even if murder and adultery is involved. But even though someone's forgiven, it doesn't mean the consequences of that sin go away. They're still there as a horrible, terrible reality. And his own house, his own family would be divided, civil wars, betrayals, envy, and it would all spring from that original terrible sin that David committed. And so when we start teaching children right from wrong, good from evil, it's because we love them and want to preserve them from the heartbreak and sorrow and emptiness that sin brings. And parents, grandparents know from bitter experience, not from the teaching of some priest, minister, or rabbi, just how powerful sin is. People realize, gee, I did this when I was in my 20s. Now I'm in my 70s, and I can still see the consequences of that decision I made 50 years ago. I can still see it. I see the effects on the people around me, how it changed the destiny of families and human relationships. So the plan God gives us in the divine law is there to deliver us from evil as we pray every time we pray the Our Father. Now, in today's second reading, Paul reminds us that we can't earn our way to heaven. You know, there were 600 laws that you could find scattered throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, and the Pharisees tried to follow every one. But no Pharisee actually believed that that would gain them salvation. They all knew that they fell short of those 600 laws, and they needed the mercy of God. But some people would get into that mentality. If I do everything right, God will owe me big time. It's like a bookkeeper's knowledge of spirituality. Well, I have all my sins on this page in the debit column, and I have all of my virtues and acts of kindness on the other page in the credit column. They balance out. Gee, I came out $1 on top when I'm meeting my Maker. Well, I'm going to heaven. That isn't the way the grace of God works. Because everything we have comes from God, and everything that we utilize is really God's gift to us. Now, in today's gospel reading, Jesus goes to town, and if you study the Gospel of Luke, Luke has all kind of balances in his gospel. Rich and poor, male and female, Pharisees and sinners. And 3 times Jesus will go and have dinner with sinners. And those dinners worked out pretty well. And 3 times Jesus goes to dinner with Pharisees, and not so well. And in today's passage we see the reputation of Jesus being merciful to sinners, not rejecting people because they were living outside the law. That must have spread far and wide. And this woman, who had committed probably every sin in the book, said, "This is the rabbi, the teacher that I've heard about. My friends have told me that he doesn't reject the likes of me." So she gets some expensive perfume, barges into a house that she wasn't welcomed in. They're all reclining at table, Oriental style. And she goes down to the feet of Jesus, anoints the feet, and he doesn't draw back from her touch. She's weeping and crying profusely, pouring out her heart and her need for forgiveness. And Jesus forgives her. Meanwhile, the Pharisees' mind's going a mile a minute. He said, "Oh man, if he were a prophet, he would throw her out on her ear." And Jesus tells them the story of the great debt. And the Pharisee is one that is in need of forgiveness because he had a hardened heart, more than the woman. She went away with peace in her heart. Now, she would still have to deal with the consequences of the mess of her life. But now she knew God was on her side, and she could begin to repair some of the damage that had been done to her and that she had inflicted on others. She could be at peace knowing that. And it's this peace which the gospel is all about. And it's this peace that could lift us from the normal unhappiness in the midst of life to a life filled with hope and a life filled with joy. And it's that message that we come back to hear Sunday after Sunday, all the Sundays of our lives. And we try to live out on the Mondays through the Saturdays of our life.